Hey, good morning. Welcome to Soaring Solo with Stacy. Soaring Solo is a community of single mothers that are determined to fly above society's expectations by rising above their circumstances and setting an example for their children. So I am really glad to have you here. If you are a single mom, welcome. If you're not a single mom and you are willing to share this with single moms that you know, that would be awesome. I wasn't on last week because we were on vacation. We were enjoying a family vacation. It was awesome. So I took a week off and I'm back today. And I don't know if you noticed, but my background's a little different. I'm at my brother's house because we're going to my niece's dance recital today. So that's going to be super fun. So it's a whole different setup. And so I'm holding my phone and I have my notes to the side. It's going to be weird. I'm going to do the best I can. But what we're going to talk about today is dealing with the other parent. And I think this is a super important topic that we don't really talk about that much. And part of the reason I think we don't talk about it is because everyone's situation is different. Everyone. There are no two situations alike. Right? So maybe you and your ex get along just fine and it's not a huge deal, but there are still things that you need to consider and you need to talk about. Maybe you can't stand the sight of each other, and every time you are in that person's presence, you get angry and evil and bitter, and they do too, and it's just awful. Well, then you definitely have some things to deal with, right? Maybe the ex is non-existent. That's my situation. He's there, but he doesn't come around, so I don't deal with him. That being said, there was a portion of time where I did have to deal with him, and there very well could be a time in the future where I have to deal with him. So there are things that I have to prepare for. Another way your ex might be non-existent is due to a death or something like that, which that's a whole different array of things that you have to deal with. So I'm talking mainly to those of you who do have to deal with your ex or your the other parent. There's a few things that I think are key when dealing with the other parent that we need to keep in mind as we make decisions and as we react and respond to things that happen. So the first thing I think that is really important is that we set boundaries. Just like in everything in our life, we need to set some boundaries. We need to set some boundaries with discipline. We need to set some boundaries when we're dating. We need to set boundaries with our exes, okay? And that relationship, regardless of whether you have a good relationship with them or cordial relationship or you have a horrible relationship, the boundaries still need to be there, because it's really easy to cross those boundaries and things can turn and get really ugly really fast. So it's so important that you decide ahead of time what those boundaries are before you're in the middle of the situation and you're reacting. All right. So think about these things as you're setting those boundaries. Think about things that are important to you. So one of the things that I would recommend is probably your best option is only to converse and only have a conversation with the ex about your kids. Anything beyond that can get weird both ways. When I first left my son's dad, one of the biggest issues we had was really texting. Okay. He would text me regularly, but it was one day he was texting me, telling me how much he loves me, how much he misses me, how much he wanted me back. And the next day he was calling me every name under the sun and telling me I was a horrible mother. So reading those texts put me on such an emotional roller coaster that it made the whole situation much more difficult than it needed to be. I made a decision early on that I was not going to respond, because any response that I gave to either of those types of texts did not end well. Okay, I fed into his power, basically. And so I decided to take away his power by not responding. I'll be honest with you, I have a friend that I was speaking to recently who this person's ex does some similar things. It sounds like, I don't know if it's phone calls or texts, but contacts this person for things other than the child. And this person has decided to just block the number of the ex until they're going to get their child. So there's an option too. I wish I would have thought of that. I would have just blocked the number. it was a hard decision because I'm a firm believer that kids need their father in their life. And I knew by not responding, eventually, because I know this man, eventually my son's dad would get bored and just stop. Once he realized that he couldn't get under my skin or he couldn't get sex anymore, he would just stop calling altogether, because he wasn't ever calling about Vance. And so by making the decision to not respond, I essentially was taking his father, my son's father, out of his life. That was a really hard decision for me because I really believe kids need their dad. But I had to sit down and I had to think about, if that is the consequence, which it was, what would Vance be missing out on? And I had to really stop and think about, what did his dad have to offer him to make him a better person? And I really struggled to find things. He couldn't teach him about handling his finances, about having a work ethic, about how to treat women, he couldn't teach him any of those things. He could have probably taught him a little bit about pool and baseball, but he's learned that elsewhere. So we're good. You know what I mean? So I had to make a very, very difficult choice. It was not an easy decision, but it was the best for my mental stability and it was the best for my son's mental stability. So I made that decision. Now, your situation might be different. You might really dislike your ex, but they might have a lot to offer your child, and you've got to be the bigger person and be able to deal with that. You know what I mean? Another boundary that you might consider setting is only meeting them in public. So especially if they're getting the kids every other week or however your situation is set up, maybe you don't meet them at their home. Maybe you go to a public place to do that. Because you don't want things to get weird, either for the attraction to show up all of a sudden again, and then that complicates things, or for anger and violence issues. I mean, we all have different situations, but meeting in public keeps things safe and keeps things in perspective. So consider something like that. Another boundary that you might consider is even having a neutral party or a mediator take control of that, switching off of the kids. If you have your parent, a grandparent of your children, or a sister or brother or somebody who's willing to say, look, I'll just be the go-between because, you two can't deal. So if you are in a situation where you and your ex are so volatile and just can't even speak on the phone without ugliness just erupting, then sometimes it's best, until you can get through that and mature a little, both of you, to have someone else kind of be the go-between. So those are just some things to consider as far as boundaries go. Just use wisdom, okay? Stop and think about what's best for my child, what's best for me, consider all of the consequences and use wisdom. If you ask for wisdom, God gives it, okay? That's very biblical. He gives it to you without finding fault. So even if you're the one who's in the wrong in this situation, he's still going to give you wisdom to get through it. So ask for it. Okay. Think about, I talked about, is the situation healthy for your kids? That's a really important thing. The second thing I want you to remember, set boundaries, but then also keep your kids' best interest as the priority. What is best for them? And that's like what I was saying before about making that decision to not respond to my ex. I knew that was going to have consequences for my child. That was a super difficult situation for me to be in. But again, I had to use wisdom. I had to decide what was more important, my sanity, my child's sanity, or him seeing his dad. And I couldn't come up with enough things to make putting up with the emotional roller coaster and the mess that I was in, that I'd gotten myself into. I take full responsibility for that. I chose my son's dad, okay? So I take responsibility for it, but I couldn't see where that would be healthy for him. So it's super important to think about what's best for your kids first. Here's something to consider as you think about what's in your children's best interest. Confrontation, if at all possible, should never happen in front of your kids. So if there is a situation where you need to confront the other person, you need to do it privately. You need to do it where the kids can't see it. They don't need to see that. One thing that is very important to keep in mind is even if you hate that other person, that's still your child's father. Okay? They are a part of them. And so when you are screaming and yelling and hating on that person, your kids could very easily take that as this is exactly how you must feel about me. That's not good. So be really careful about confronting in front of your children. I would say if there is any way possible, keep things in private. Choose your words wisely. Okay, this is something I'm working on a daily level in general because my mouth runs a lot and I say a lot of stupid stuff that afterwards I'm like, well, that wasn't very smart. Now was it? So use your words wisely, but especially not when you're speaking about their father. Okay, this is something that I really, really tried hard to do with my son, and I failed miserably some days, but I really, really tried not to say anything negative about my son's dad in front of my son. It's hard because I have a lot of negative things to say. I have anger. It's there. I was hurt. So it's really hard not to speak negatively. But the thing is that, like I said, that's still his dad. So one of the things that, especially as Vance has gotten older, what I've tried to do is really point out the things that are good about his dad. I say were, don't mean to use past tense. So a lot of times, because we have a tendency to see our ex in our children, they pick up those traits and we're like, oh my gosh, you're just like your father. And that's not always a bad thing. So I've had to consciously pick out the good that Vance got from Jeremy. So I look at Vance and I see his athletic ability. That certainly did not come from me. The athletic ability that he does have must have come from his father. His sense of humor, for sure. I mean, I have a good sense of humor, but his dad's a jokester, and so those are good things. There are good things that came from his dad. And so I want him to see that, even though I've slipped up and said some things that I probably shouldn't have, even though I really tried not to, there are good things too. And so you do get the good from that other person, even when he's not in the picture. So use those words wisely. Be kind. Find a way to be kind. Say the ugly stuff to your BFF when your kids are not around. Okay, I get sometimes you just got to get it out, but do it in private. And then I just want to go back to something we talked about a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about training our children. We need to use those tactics for ourselves as well as for our kids. So those 3 questions that I talked about, I want to go over those again because that is important in so many situations. So as you're navigating dealing with your ex, I want you to think about those same 3 questions that we should be teaching our kids every time they have a decision to make. What might the consequences be? If I say this, if I do this, what might the consequences be? The second question is, would this hurt me or someone else? Okay, would this hurt my child? Would this hurt me? Would this hurt my ex? Would this hurt anyone else? You need to consider that before you say or do something with your ex. And finally, would I be embarrassed if someone found out? Because I'll be honest with you, I've lost my crap on my ex and said and done things that were just ugly and hateful. And frankly, it's embarrassing because that's not the person I want to be known as. I want to be the person that holds myself together and holds my head up high and is respectable. And there have been times when I was not. Okay, I'm just going to be honest here. There were times when I've said and done things that I would be embarrassed by. So if I could stop myself ahead of time and say, yeah, you probably wouldn't want that video going viral, would ya? Then maybe it'll stop you in your tracks. So consider those things as you're dealing with baby daddy, okay? It's always fun. It's never going to be perfect. Give yourself some grace. I say that all the time. We're going to mess up. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through it. Soaring Solo group is open. I would love to add you to that. If you are interested in, if you're a single mom and you're interested in joining, I would love to have you. If you know single moms that could use some support, that have questions, I would love to work with them. So send them my way, okay? Share the video, share my name, whatever, send them my way. I would love to help as many people as I can navigate through this thing of called single motherhood, because you are not soaring. You may be soaring solo, but you're not tackling motherhood alone. All right, you guys have a great weekend. See you later.